Okay, so this is exciting. We're going to be talking about evolution, biodiversity, and population ecology. And very exciting. This is where we get to talk about natural selection, survival of the fittest, and how we have influences through our environment and organisms that causes species to evolve. We're going to talk about extinction of organisms, the natural extinction rate, and then extinction that's caused about by one species, which is the human species. We'll go through organization ecologically, talk about characteristics of a population, population ecology, and then conservation biology, which is something you guys are engaged in very much. So, if we talk about something like the golden toad in Costa Rica, here's the deal. This is a species that's on top of a mountain, a very mountainous area in Chile, Monteverde. They find the golden toad, and then what happens is, due to climatological change, in other words, uh, the warming of our environment through global warming, what happens is their habitat is dying, their forest that they live in a very small niche area, right? So there's only so much of this habitat. And so what happens is the golden toad then succumbs to changing in habitat, or there's a mutation that takes place, and there's a whole line of genetic mutations called transmutation, which people get involved in, or a mutation takes place naturally that allows the toad to survive. Well, unfortunately, we can't just stop global warming or climatological change, climate change. And so that's the issue. So, what is biodiversity? Biodiversity is organisms that have genetic differences, and the more biological diversity that there is on a planet, the better we are. Um, and what happens is organisms change over time, and so the genetics of a population are changing, whether it be through random mutations or natural selection or whatever. We see biological evolution. Natural selection we refer to as survival of the fittest. Traits that are allowing you to survive better than an individual who has traits that don't. And so what happens is that if you have traits such as enormously long tail feathers in a bird, well, this could prove to be a very detrimental thing, especially when it comes to flying or trying to get away from something. And so, what we find is there is an optimum tail length in things like the ring-necked pheasant, right? And so, yeah, size matters. The longer the tail feather, you get caught. The smaller the tail feather, well, the female doesn't see you as genetically a good fit for a mate, and so there's an optimum range there, which is really cool. Um, so, what we need to understand is evolution is a critical thing, and it's a wonderful thing to have happen. And so, things are constantly evolving to other organisms and their surrounding and things, and the genetic makeup of a population changes when an organism is able to survive better and pass on those traits. And so what we see is that evolution is slow and it takes a long time, but organisms that are better able to survive will then spread their genes, and over a period of time they'll adapt to their surrounding. So there's some interesting controversy here. the controversy of whether Darwin or Wallace were the real drivers of the theory of evolution, or theory of natural selection or theory of evolution by natural selection. Um, um, and so there was a question of who came up with it first. They were both working on it in 1858. Darwin uh, then goes on a journey. I believe it took 5 years or something like that on the HMS Beagle, which is a boat. And Darwin was really, really good at cataloging and identifying species. And his big thing was beetles. He loved beetles and catalog beetles. And I guess that was a really big thing back in the day that everybody had a beetle collection and looked at beetles. But both of these guys really came up with this whole idea that organisms produce more offspring than can possibly survive. Um, the environment contains things that kills. Um, uh, Individual species have traits that vary within a population, and some of those traits allow you better to able to survive. Um, these are things that are the five tenets, basically, of the theory of evolution by natural selection. So both of these guys come up with it. Darwin is credited majorly for these things. But these are things that are being proposed at a time where if you say these things, people are not responding very nice to you. And so what I guess really comes down to is if we look at these things and say, okay, um, these are the things that allow organisms to survive and pass on their genes, then now it's starting to make sense that you can't perpetuate a species if you're not having babies that survive. So what's an adaptive trait? Adaptation, a trait that is promoting reproductive success. And we are constantly having mutations due to all sorts of things, including if you think about it, people who spend too much time in the sun, they get what's called a thymine dimer, which is two thymines, adenine, cytosine, thymine, guanine, uracil. These are our DNA, right? And so we get a change where we change an adenine to a thymine, and where two thymines are sitting next to each other. Long story short is um, most of the time they're non-lethal mutations, and we get those. But sometimes they are lethal, um, and it causes cancer, right? But these non-lethal mutations, if they are on a gene that causes a different protein to be made, or causes you to be resistant to something, then it could change your chances for survival, and then increase your chances for positive reproduction, um, again, making babies. So genetic variation is really, really good, important. Um, if we look at um, some different types of selection that take place, so it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? This bed's too hard, or this bed's too soft, but this bed's just right. And so if we look at shell thickness in snails, and we think about, okay, what if a shell thickness is allowing a snail to survive, right? Then we can look at a directional selection. So if you're a snail and you have thick shells, then the thicker the shell, you're probably able to survive until it gets to a point where the shell is so thick it causes some detrimental thing to happen to you. And so we see this bell curve here. So A is directional selection. Um, if we see stabilizing, so stabilizing means that the outside traits are not favored, and we're coming towards this optimum place. So example, so an intermediate shell thickness, too small, not good. Too big, not good. It's stabilized right in the middle. And then you have what's called disruptive. Disruptive means it's okay if you have a thin shell, it's okay if you have a thick shell, but if you have a medium sized shell or medium thickness shell, sorry, it's not going to happen. You're not going to make it. And so we see these different types of selection taking place in organisms, right? So all species, I'll give you an example. Certain birds are able to eat certain size seeds. Some birds don't even eat seeds. And so if your bill is too soft that you cannot crack the seed open, you're not going to eat. And so the harder the bill in this case, the more able to eat the seed until your bill gets so hard that you can't use it anymore for cracking that seed um, and get what you need. So it's this would be a directional, right? So pretty cool. Environmental changes. Um, Darwinism and Darwin is very famous for the selective breeding of not selective breeding. I apologize for birds, and these are the honey creepers. And if you look at the different bill type, I'm sorry, these are the Galapagos finches. I didn't mean to say honey creepers. If you look at the different bill types, this bill here, for an example, is a nectar drinking bill, and this I don't know if this is the medium ground finch. I can't really tell by the pictures, but like this one here has a thicker bill to be able to crack seeds. They've all adapted to eating different food sources. And so what happens is now if your food source goes away, you're dependent, you're a specialist as far as your feeding behavior, not a generalist. And so we constantly are looking at different traits and how adaptation allows them to best survive. Um, we're constantly, as a species, the humans, we are selectively selecting traits all the time, like sweet corn and all these other things. Herpetologists are really great at it as far as genetic breeding of snakes, our animals. Yeah, happens all the time. Artificial selection, we are selecting for traits that we find most enjoyable or most useful. And so if we look at dogs, for example, Canis familiaris, well, we have all different uh, types of breeds of dogs, and but they all uh, came from Canis lupus, which is the wolf. And so we see that somewhere at a point in time that a wolf with a genetic disposition to be calm found that it was better able to survive making friends with a species called Homo sapien, and that then allowed them to get food or shelter or both, and the dog was born. Same thing with when we look at things like broccoli and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and cauliflower. Um, they all come from one lineage, and we have artificially selected for that. Humans have done that. Biological diversity, as I said earlier, it's the sum total of all organisms, their genes, in the gene pool, in their population, in an area, and we're looking at the diversity of species. And the more the number of species, the better off we are. And if we think about Illinois cornfields and bean fields, not so great because we're a monoculture, right? But a species is a population or group of individuals who share the same characteristics and freely breed, producing fertile offspring. And I say fertile offspring because we have species that can breed that produce offspring, but they're not fertile. So mules, right? So um, uh, a donkey and a horse producing a mule. And there's an exceptions to that rule too. Every once in a while they are fertile, but they don't produce again. a population. It's a group of individuals that live in the same area at the same time of the same species. And so that's particularly important when we talk about a population. Allopatric speciation, uh, if we look at the different way populations are formed or um, a species evolves, allopatric speciation, we are uh, creating a species due to some physical separation. And over here in this graphic, um, it's very similar to like the squirrels in the Grand Canyon, right? On one side of the Grand Canyon, there's a species of squirrel that has 5 toes, and on the other side of the Grand Canyon, there's a species of squirrel that has 4 toes. Um, why is that? Well, the Grand Canyon is really big, and it's hard to get across it. So pretty much, you're divided somewhere in there. Allopatric speciation, um, we've got a geographic barrier of some sort, a mountain, the ocean, whereas one population of squirrel or the other has some sort of genetic mutation, and whammo, you've got a total different trait that's being expressed. In this case, brown golden fur versus black fur. I don't know, right? So, but that is the main mode of the creation of species. Sympatric speciation, we're going from populations that, for whatever reason, become isolated, and they are not unable to reproduce. So, whether it be that they come into estrus at different times, or they have different mutations that have caused them to be one species diurnal, one species nocturnal. They never see each other. Basically, they become isolated in the same area due to some mutation. Phylogenetic tree, this is what's called a cladogram. And basically, if you look as we go through this, as you go up the chart, um, you see that it changes. So what you have here, for example, lamprey, which are the jawless fish, sea lamprey. Um, at this point, everything above this has a jaw. And then we get to the sharks, which are the cartilaginous fish. So before this, everything is cartilage. And then all of a sudden, we see the advent of a swim bladder. So everything this way has some sort of a lung or a swim bladder. And then we get past the lungfish, and now everything this way has 4 legs. And you're going to say, well, wait a minute, the snake doesn't have 4 legs. Well, if you look in their skeleton, it does have where it's called a vestigial structure, where the evidence was that there was legs, and they don't have that. So, and again, if we look, everything above here has an egg to retain moisture in its young. Now, notice we have a shoot off here, right? So we shoot off, and all of a sudden we go, oh, has hair. Well, none of these guys have hair, and the trait is not on this main trunk. And so, if we had more organisms, animals on here, mammals, and it would branch off, and so it's the tree of life, right? Extinction. Um, Basically, extinction is when an organism is gone, and when the last member of a species dies, they become extinct. Um, that said, extinction is a natural process, and we see that happening because organisms are no longer able to survive in the environment due to lots of things, due to one species changing in the environment, due to their habitat. Maybe they lost their food. However, humans are the ones who have caused the greatest impact, right? We're the ones that are caused the rate of extinction to increase exponentially. So when we talk about different species, Some are better able to survive, and some are more environmentally susceptible to going extinct. And so, if their environment changes too quickly, okay, you're not going to make it. Um, an endemic species is one that only lives in a certain area. So, like the golden toad, right? It's only there and it's very susceptible to any change. And so, now that the climate on the mountain is changing because it's drying out or it's getting warmer, now their species is very susceptible to extinction. We also have issues like all the hurricanes that are going on, again, caused by the amount of moisture that's put in the air. So, we have an issue that's causing the driving of the storms, and so extinction. Um, a new species comes into an area um, that causes extinction, and we have introduced species which are not endemic to an area, and they are brought in as an exotic, and then it changes the whole dynamic of an ecosystem. So we have what's called a natural background extinction rate. It's the normal rate of extinction, and it's there. Animals go extinct. However, what we've done as a species is we've sped up that extinction rate by over 1,000 times. Now, there's been some mass extinctions, like uh, 163 million years ago, 160, no, 160 million years ago. Sorry about that. 160 million years ago, when this massive meteor struck the Yucatan Peninsula, asteroid blows up, creates 6 months of total darkness. Yeah, right. So that's a mass extinction. We are now in what's called the Anthropocene, which is the age of man. And we are causing what's called the sixth mass extinction. And why? We are causing resource depletion, population growth issues, and we're constantly developing ground and area for ourselves. And so we are causing the sixth mass extinction. If we look at this, I believe this is Plethodon cinereus, the redback salamander. So if we look at this, it is a species that's very selective, endemic to an area. And so what happens is it requires moisture, it requires all these different things. And what happens is they can't move very far. They're a salamander. Their little legs are tiny. And so it could be very difficult. Redback salamander, Plethodon cinereus. I actually worked with this when I was in college. Um, I'm going to go ahead and stop here. We'll pick up for the second part. I just want to say thank you so much. You guys are awesome, amazing. It is a privilege, and thanks for making an impact in our world.